Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm very honored and very privileged to be here. And I am wired for sound, so can everybody hear me?
Does the sound good? Does it need to go up at all?
Anybody in the back?
A little bit.
A little bit, okay.
This is a new system, so we're still getting to know it.
I don't, any change? Better? I don't see, is it working?
Hold on. You're right.
How's that? Ah,
Is that too loud or is that all right?
that's okay.
Awesome.
Okay, well, I'm really overwhelmed with all you folks. To talk a little bit about Hoosick, we got to go back a little bit and take a look at who this is kind of the scorecard. You know, you got to have the scorecard to figure out who the players are. So let's start off real quick here. The original road, the Fitchburg Railroad, up to Fitchburg, 1845 when it opened. The same boys with Alva Crocker then built the Vermont and Massachusetts from Fitchburg to, whoops, not to Greenfield, but to Brattleboro. The reason they did that was to avoid getting into political complications with the boys over here who had built the Boston and Worcester. And 1849 this opens, 1850 they just happened to build a branch to Greenfield. We'll skip over the Troy and Greenfield for obvious reasons. And then another group built this Vermont Southern, all 6 or 7 miles of it, or the Southern Vermont. There was a changeover of capital for about every mile of the 7-mile railroad. And finally, we have the Troy and Boston, which was a New York-based group from Troy, which built over, connected with the Vermont Southern, which connected with the Troy and Greenfield. And of course, we have the Western Railroad, which these two, of course, became the B&A, and that was through Springfield and opened in 1845, I think. The two latecomers for this area was the New Haven and Northampton. This was a road that came up out of New Haven and Farmington, Connecticut, came up through the west of the Connecticut River main line, did have an interconnect at the Northampton Union Station, but in 1881 opened, came up to South Deerfield. One branch went to Turner's Falls, which I haven't shown. This branch came up to what was called Shelburne Junction, which was just to the west of Bardwell's Ferry, and that allowed passenger trains to run to Greenfield. You know, that's not through the tunnel, but it does have a relationship with it. And finally, we had way up in the corner, the Boston-Hoosick Tunnel in Weston. This was a grand scheme that was going to go out through upstate New York, but the promoter dropped dead at the gaming tables in Saratoga Springs, or Saratoga. So that was the end of it. What he did get built was from the Mass border to Johnsonville, going over and under and around the Troy and Boston, which wasn't very happy about this. And at Johnsonville, they crossed and split for the last time. The line from there to Mechanicville and Rotterdam Junction is the only part of the old HT&W that still exists. It's the B&M's freight main line, or whoever it is these days, Berkshire and Eastern. So now that we have the players identified, we'll do a little bit of, as the boys at Click and Clack used to say, a little bit of shameless self-promotion here, and show off that wonderful 1875 poster. And the tunnel started with great optimism. Ground was broken on the Troy and Greenfield, and this is January 8th, 1851. And I think after they broke ground, they probably went to have something to warm the body and soul. But 18 months in early 1853, this machine showed up at where the east portal of the tunnel is today, or basically 50 feet to the south of it. This thing weighed 25 tons. It was a boring machine, weighed 25 tons, and came by rail to Greenfield. It was hauled by oxen, presumably, on sledges up the Deerfield River Valley, all the way and assembled up there. with a steam boiler and the whole shtick. It was so early that there are no known photographs of it, and if one of you know where one is, please let me know. But there is a line drawing of it after it had failed and is still stuck in its own hole. Now that being said, and the hole is quite visible in this turn of the 20th century image, and you'll notice it doesn't appear round. You see, the earth pressure, it was obviously completely circular when it was cut. It cut in about 10 feet for it. It quit. And you can see the pressure of the earth has made it egg-shaped. But it is the great-great-granddaddy of these huge tunnel boring machines. And this is one of the ones I believe that was used in the 1990s to bore the channel between under the English Channel. So after the senior moment, after the boring machine fiasco, we went back to doing things the old-fashioned way, which was a promoter by the name of Herman Haupt was hired, and he brought some, shall we say, Pennsylvania miners and Philadelphia mainline credit with him, which was appreciated, and he started building the Troy and Greenfield and the tunnel. Now, Haupt accomplished some things. He built some roadbed. He tunneled in at the west end, at the east end. He did tunnel in a little bit at the west end, but he had his issues. And by this point in time, the political opposition began to get, the ears were going up saying, hey, the boys down on the Western Railroad weren't enthusiastic about a competitive line at all. So they decided to, try to put the brakes on this. And long story short, there were a couple of state loans involved, and there wasn't enough work done. They told Haupt he wasn't going to get paid in 1861, so he left. In 1862, the tunnel collapsed, the TNG collapsed into bankruptcy. Surprise, surprise. The only money they'd ever really had was either what Haupt had brought up from him from Pennsylvania or what the state had fronted for him, and he disappeared. The state legislature in 1863 decided, let's see whether we can do something with this. And in 1863, they hired Thomas Doane as a chief engineer. Doane was quite well respected and quite well connected. And the first thing he was going to do was to resurvey the tunnel, because as Haupt had done it, it wasn't a straight line. It was going to come in on a V, so there'd be somewhere along in the middle, there'd be a little curve and everything would be fine. Well, that wasn't the way Thomas Doane did business. Here he is on the east end of the tunnel, next to his building, which was his office on site. Unfortunately, none of these men are identified. We think Doane might well be the man by the survey instrument, but we don't know for sure. Here's a quick layout of how he did it. You have a back site on which what I think is known as Notch Mountain. You had a site on the top of the East Ridge, the West Ridge, and of course over here on Negus Mountain. Actually, there was nothing but a pole, and then down at the East Portal, there was a lining tower as well, and there were two little mini stone towers at the central shaft. So what they did there was they had the line site. They ran wires parallel to that, a couple of thousandths of an inch apart, and then they dropped lines down with plumb bobs as they started to dig down to dig the 1,000-foot shaft, which was ostensibly for ventilation, but had also been put in the legislation by the Antis, because the Antis figured nobody could dig 1,000 feet straight down and that would kill the project. And they were darn near right. And here we have a picture of probably about 1870, but you have a very clear picture of the lining tower and this iron rod with either red and white or black and white paint on it for sighting purposes. And here's a shot from the Stanley Brown collection. I think it's probably his daughter standing by it, showing one of the buildings as it looked in about 1950. They're all collapsed now. But at the west end, as we know, water and mud and muck was an issue. And another contractor was brought in 1866 under Doan. This was Bernard N. Farron. He started building this brick tube. First thing they did was they laid out an area 500 feet long, and they started building a brick invert, which was 6 to 8 layers of brick thick. And then they came up and commenced with an arch. Now this, obviously this is a posed photograph with the mule and the surveying equipment below, and the 4 lovely ladies with their parasols up at the top. And it is, of course, the very first beginnings of the brickwork, and you can see how thick it is. It is between 3 and 4 feet thick. And at the end of the day, 2 brickyards made over 20 million brick that were installed in the first 7,500 feet of Hoosick Tunnel from the west end in. There's about 2,500 feet that's complete brick tube, and another 5,000 feet that is brick arch, all of which now is covered in shotcrete. So while that was going on, Mr. Doan realized he had to figure out how to do things better. So he talked with Charles Burley of Fitchburg, and Mr. Burley had created the first practical automatic drill, powered by compressed air. Note the star point on the end of it and the cylinder. The piston rammed the drill in. When they came back, there was a ratchet mechanism and rotated it 25 or 30 degrees, so it kept rotating and kept drilling. The comment was made, they were difficult to maintain and broke down frequently. However, they were beginning to get the job done, and that's what counted. Here we have a very unusual shot because this is an actual shot in the tunnel face. This was an 8x10 glass negative, camera, and magnesium powder, flash powder. And I'm amazed they were able to get the quality shot they got. That's very early for that kind of a photo. So, and now that you've got the holes drilled deeper, you needed to put something in it that had a bigger bang, and that was provided by George Mowbray. Mowbray had been out in Titusville, Pennsylvania with the early oil wells and so on, and he was willing to make something that he called trinitroglycerin. Suffice it to say, it was liquid, pure nitroglycerin. He called it trinitroglycerin. And it had a lot of bang for the bucks, but it was very finicky. You could drop a vial and it would explode. So he moved to town, and he made his nitroglycerin works over by West Shaft, which is about 3,000 feet in from West Portal. And here's one photo of it, and I think this was obviously a little bit of poking fun at things, because here's the young man. You can't see it, and this image is not the clearest I've ever had. He's got a stalk of grass in his mouth. He's sitting there, but now if we go to the subsequent image, you'll notice it's a completely different set of buildings. It's because it blew up at least 3 times, if not more. In fact, one unfortunate soul knew it was going to blow up. He ran out the door. Thing blew up behind him. When they found him, the shock wave had killed him. Not a mark on him. They just found him laying there. So, but Mr. Mowbray's elixir did the job. And in fact, this is one of the stone jars used in the converting room, because this was courtesy of the Hagley Museum in Wilmington, Delaware. And there is one interesting story with this. Well, probably lots, but the one I'm going to limit myself to is when they first started making nitroglycerin, they thought it was safest at 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So the chief engineer, Granger, over on the east end had a ice jam about 1868 or 1869. So Mowbray filled up some tubes with nitroglycerin. They got it all heated up, put it in the sleigh, and up over the mountain they go. They start going down the east side of the mountain, and the sleigh decided it's going to go over the edge of the road. And after quickly examining all possible options, Granger decided if the sleigh's going that way with the nitro, I'm going this way with the snowbank. And he laid in the snowbank for a few seconds and realized he wasn't in front of St. Peter, there'd been no bang. He took the nitroglycerin, put it back in the sleigh, went down, put an exploder on it, and it didn't explode. From that point on, the ice business got very good in North Adams until the end of the tunnel construction, and indeed that was how it was handled, was frozen, and that is exactly, that fateful trip was exactly how it was found out. And of course, something near and dear to our late librarian friend Ruth Brown was, of course, Charles and William Brown, who developed the electric exploder to ignite that nitroglycerin. So now the package was all put together, except tragedy struck. In 1867, the central shaft was down some 580 feet, and there was something called the gasometer around the building that one of the prior contractors, and they were going through contractors, you know, practically as fast as they changed their clothes. It was one after the other. And one of the contractors decided to try to play with this thing. Well, the next thing, because it was using the fumes from gasoline, the next thing, kaboom, the building's ablaze, everything goes down the shaft. The poor guys at the bottom are either drowned, impaled, or asphyxiated when everything falls in. Well, of course, needless to say, that stopped the work completely in the fall of 1867. And for those who were spiritually inclined, this is where the first ghost stories at Hoosick Tunnel came from. They said during that winter with the snow and so on, there was a little village at Central Shaft, and they saw miners, they'd speak to them, the miners would disappear and not respond. Now supposedly the next summer, the shaft got drained, the bodies got proper burial, and the ghosts went away. So, but in 1868, the state of Massachusetts was in a similar state to what Washington, D.C. is right now. It was at absolute loggerheads between the we want to kill the tunnel crowd and we want to build the tunnel crowd. Finally, a deal was negotiated that they would put the project out to bid. Well, the antis went along with it because they inserted into the legislation a provision that said you had to put up a $500,000 bond, which would probably be the equivalent of a $500 million bond today, and they figured nobody could do it. Well, Walter Shanley and his brother Francis, who were well-known and well-respected builders in Canada, in fact, some of both the Canadian National and Canadian Pacific rail lines between Montreal and Toronto were built by these brothers. The road beds are still carrying the rails today. They decided, well, we'll bid on the job. They were the low bidder, and they came to the state and said, tell you what, we'll keep track, and we'll do $500,000 worth of work for you before we bill you. They outfoxed the guys because they could do $500,000 worth of work for between $200,000 and $250,000 of cash outlay. So the Andes got outfoxed one more time, but it was another Perils of Pauline adventure. So between the drills, the nitro, the exploders, and the grit and the organization ability of Walter Shanley, there were very regular explosions in Hoosick Mountain. He put the project on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, mechanized it. The workers respected him. He helped build housing for the families, a school at the East End, and basically turned it from a haphazard operation into a professionally run construction site. And it is kind of interesting, they didn't blast the whole face off. Here on the west side, they blasted against the ceiling first, and then they blasted on the bench or the bottom. Now the headings were never this close on this drawing, but you can see them here in this example, Here you've got, this is January 1st, 1872. Here you got full-sized, here you got the bench. Here you've got a little bit of each. On the other side, they went in on the ceiling first and the bench behind. One of the reasons they went in on the ceiling first at the central shaft was until they could connect here, all the water which poured in here, which was tens of thousands of gallons an hour, had to be pumped up and out. Which was one thing the Shanleys didn't figure on. It cost them dearly, the pumps. So let's see here. Now, this is a major construction site. But that, because of the controversy, a lot of people wanted to see what was going on. And would you believe, here we have the Vermont and Massachusetts Railway, which de facto was operated by the Fitchburg Railroad. October 1873, it is not yet, the tunnel is not yet hauled through, but you have 2 trains a day to the Hoosick Tunnel, and you have 2 trains a day leaving Hoosick Tunnel. And you had 2 purposes for it. One was when you got to the tunnel, you got off, you got on a Concord stagecoach, and you went over the mountain to North Adams, or from North Adams. But the other thing you had on the Boston side, they'd rent, at the hotels, they'd rent you rain gear, and you could just walk right in on the job site. I mean, this must have given, if Walter Shanley didn't have enough gray hairs as it was, I'm sure this didn't help any. Now, it probably slowed down after the day they had 500 pounds of nitroglycerin blow up on a train in there. Fortunately, there weren't too many, if any, visitors at that day. But I have seen, but I do not have, an advertising poster from this period for a special excursion to the tunnel. We're going to walk in, we're going to look at this, we're going to do this, and we're going to go back to Boston. And I think the fare was like $1 or $2. But of course, that's when you made $1 or $2 a day. So at this point in time, of course, we know the tunnel was hauled through on November 27th, 1873. Now I'm going to take a tad of time in here and discuss a couple of things. This was provided to me by Chuck Cahoon. This is out of the newspaper, the transcript, the day before the tunnel was hauled through, in which it states 136 lives were lost. Now this is a classic good news. The good news is 196 lives, the commonly used figure, were not lost. Of course, the bad news is 136 were. But I suspect that somewhere along the line in this time period, either a typo was made or a handwritten note was, a 3 was made a 9, and, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. So 196 looked better for the headline than 136. And so that's where that kind of developed. And I will say the late Chuck Cahoon spent years, decades, trying to find every single grave of someone who had been killed at the tunnel. And his last accounting was, I believe, 136 or 137 people. So it is, you know, fortunately it was bad enough as it was, but it wasn't as bad as the paper said it was. And here's another thing. We all know of the 5/16 inch of the meeting of the headings and the 9/16 inch meeting from central shaft out purportedly to the portals. This is a note written by Chief Engineer Doane in November of 1892, sent to William Granger. Granger was the East End chief engineer under Doane and then under Shanley. In fact, Granger was the guy with the nitroglycerin. I understand the line was never really run clean through the tunnel after the tunnel was finished, which means with a little bit of, this is 5/16 of an inch out at 1,600 feet from the central shaft, 9/16 out at 2,000 feet west of the central shaft. If you carry these lines out to both ends, you come up to between 4 and 5 inches of discrepancy. Still pretty darn good for 25,000 feet of tunnel that was started with black powder and hand drills. But it is interesting, again, that the numbers got picked up, but the details weren't picked up, apparently. And I want to give credit to to my friend and fellow Hoosick enthusiast, Jerry Kelly. He was the one that found this note and sent it to me and said, Carl, you'll be interested in reading this, and he was very correct. So we are now celebrating next week, actually, the 150th anniversary of the first official passenger train through the tunnel. Now, I'm going to give a slight commentary on this. The first train through the tunnel was in February of 1875. Everybody that was anybody got on that train. So it really was the first passenger train through the tunnel. I mean, really, guys. But the governor and the Railroad Committee of the legislature decided to come up and take a look at Massachusetts' largest public works investment. So they came up on October 13th. And this is not labeled as such, but the record shows when the governor came up, several women came with him, either wives, his wife, and the wives of probably the major legislators, or possibly their executive secretaries. And here in this picture, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4 women. Other than for the posed picture, a few images back with them on the top of the brickwork, there are no other images with women at the tunnel. So that's one reason why I believe this is a picture of that train. The other reason is, look at the cant on the locomotive. That track is not ballasted at all. And I suspect they were all very glad to get some fresh air when they posed for the photographer, Mr. Ward. According to the report, they did a little speechifying in North Adams, of course, and they continued on their way to Troy. Whether they came back the Hoosick Tunnel way the next day or whether they went over and came down the B&A, I don't know. And we have another period shot, again showing the very basic nature of the track work at that time. And here's one showing a little bit later. I don't know what the date is, but indeed the second track has now there's now a switch been installed, so either one can take traffic into the tunnel. And you'll notice that two-story building there, that was the original signal tower, I think. You gave the guy a flag or a staff, and he gave it to the guy in the signal tower at the other end of the tunnel. And until he got that, nothing came back the other way. It was crude, but it worked, at least with the small volume of trains. Actually, I should point out at this time the trains were operated by the contractor. The contractor was N.C. Munson. Munson had taken over the contract to finish the tunnel, cut the bore out to full size, lay the track. Shanley's had all of Massachusetts they wanted, referring to our great and general court as the largest bunch of scallywags he'd ever seen. So some things haven't changed too much. And they negotiated the end of their contract, and Munson came in and did the final work. He was well respected. He was one of the contractors that moved millions of yards of earth to fill in Boston's Back Bay for the Back Bay neighborhood now from the original marshland. So he had a pretty good idea of what he was doing moving earth. And he ran, starting in July of 1875, he was running a freight train a day through the tunnel, and then he decided to stick a passenger car in the back of it. And that car went east about 6 in the morning and came back about 6:30 or 7 at night. And there was traffic, but once again, I believe it was $1 or $1.50 for a ride, so it wasn't done for pleasure in those years. And here we have the nice new 1875 roundhouse, 3 or 4 stall roundhouse, and a Fitchburg 260 in front of it. This came from the late Randy Traybold collection. I'm sure that name rings a bell with a few of you. And of course the classic poster from about 1879 or 1880, showing a passenger train going in and a train coming out. Beautiful piece of artwork. Now here we are, the Fitchburg Railroad, January 1880. Trains will run as follows. And it's interesting to note that we have, if we look at this side, we have about 5 trains running through the tunnel, 5 passenger trains running through the tunnel every day. And here we did a little bit of a turn the thing around 90 degrees. At 8:30 in the morning, we have a special Chicago Express with a drawing room car attached. And then at 3, we have the St. Louis Express with the through sleeper to St. Louis. And we have the Express to Waltham. Well, the MBTA still has an Express to Waltham. And finally, we have the Pacific Express with the through sleeping car to Chicago. In all cases here, it was the 1 or 2 sleepers that were handed off to the New York Central system for forwarding to either Chicago or St. Louis. But what were these cars for some of the younger folks that don't have a clue? These are 1930s documents I scanned, so they aren't the cars aren't as frilly as they were in 1880. But you have the basic berth up on top. 2 people, up to 4 people can sit facing each other at night. The seat, the bottom seat pulls together, the lower part of the seat back comes down, and the lid for the upper berth drops down. Mattress is taken from up there, laid across the lower bed, and you have a little mattress on the upper bed, so you have your upper and your lower, and you can see both. You have to use a ladder to climb up to the upper berth, and if you wanted to go to, the only thing between you and a total stranger was the green canvas curtain, and if you wanted to go to the bathroom, you went to the end of the car. But yet, at its height in the mid-1920s, Mr. Pullman operated a hotel chain with over 100,000 berths, and probably 50 to 60% was the average occupancy. One could legitimately claim he was the largest hotelier in the world. And the early train mentioned a drawing room. This is a true drawing room from the 30s period, which had like the section sleeper and then a sofa on the opposite side. In this case, rather than the corridor coming down the middle of the car, it would go around the drawing room. I doubt that is what they actually had in 1880 or 81. I suspect they had what we call a parlor car with the comfortable rotating seats and possibly an attendant. So that gives you an idea of what those accommodations were. And here, I couldn't resist putting this in. The image comes from the Shelburne Falls Trolley Museum. This is, I had mentioned the New Haven coming up and arriving at Shelburne Junction in 1881. The trains ran up the Fitchburg at the time, later the B&M, to Shelburne Falls. And the New Haven had their own little engine house and their own turntable. And their cars are behind. I think between those cars and the folks standing here was the 2-track of the Fitchburg of the B&M Maine. But they turn the engine around by hand and take the train and head back toward New York City. This is a whole crew out for the very special picture occasion, I would say. I date it because of the fanciness of the lettering and so on. I date it to the mid-1880s, but it's a real piece of work, and they're a real piece of work. And here we have a schedule on that line. New Haven and Shelburne Falls, for example, you've got one that left Grand Central Terminal in New York at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, got to Shelburne Falls at 7:20. I'm not sure from Midtown Manhattan if I could get back to Shelburne Falls any faster than that. Now, the reason I mention this is because, and you can see it over on the display there, is when this line opened for 2 or 3 seasons, they ran an exclusive parlor car train from Grand Central Terminal up to Stamford, Connecticut, up to New Haven, and up this line through Shelburne Falls, through the tunnel, North Adams, and then up to Saratoga Springs. These trains were not uncommon for the Gilded Age crowd out of Manhattan, and I think they felt there might be some business coming up through the Connecticut Valley as well. I would say the trains ran close to empty because they only lasted a couple of summers. But they did indeed run up through Shelburne Falls briefly. Here is a photo that belonged to a woman whose name was Mabel Ragoose. She was a contemporary of my mother. She lived in Shelburne Falls, and she gave me a group of family photographs dating to the 1880s or the 1890s. This is a westbound, according to the handwriting on the back, at Hoosick Tunnel Station. I suspect the apprehensive young lady who was about to get on the train, I'd say, she's holding a valise, or I think they call them portmanteaus or something like that. And perhaps it's her mother or her sister that's with her. There's a man of some authority walking by with a bowler hat. The agent and the baggage man are having a conversation, and a couple of guys are walking down the platform. What strikes me is this was absolutely workaday every day, and today it's all gone. There's not a thing left except 2 railroad tracks through there. That's all there is, and one of them is a siding, not the main line. But this was taken in the late 1890s, I would say. Now, at the turn of the century, the B&M took over the Fitchburg, and you can see here again we have like 6 trains, only 6 trains a day on going through to Troy or Albany, and again the ones in the middle that have numerous stops are obviously the ones that are carrying the Chicago or the St. Louis sleepers. And here is a wonderful postcard. It's got to be after 1900 because it's promoted by Boston and Maine Railroad. Was supplied to me by a friend of mine, Steve Myers, who's quite the postcard collector. And this is out in west. Well, it's the Continental Limited at Greylock Station, which was, of course, west of the downtown North Adams or even the Blackington Station. If you look at the card closely, and you've got 6 or 7 cars, probably a 440 or a 260 for a steam engine. You got a baggage car, a railway, express car, an RPO baggage car, a couple of coaches, probably a diner, and a through sleeper, and 6 or 7 cars in total, and that's about what you see here in the picture. This was one of those postcards that was a black and white image, which was colorized in Germany, which was common from the 1890s until the beginning of World War I. And can I get a little bit of light? I would like to read a little bit. Let's see if I can get well, let me see if I can do it. I wanted to talk about a trip. Thank you. I wanted to talk briefly about a trip through the tunnel. This Mabel Ragoose, who gave me several of these images, went through it as a young girl before it was electrified. And these are her memories as recounted to me. I can well remember leaving our home in Shelburne Falls and taking the trolley for the short ride up to the depot. Upon boarding the 3 or 4 car train, we'd promptly sit down on the red plush walkover seat in the day coach. Soot, cinders, and dirt were seemingly everywhere, mixed in various proportions. A few minutes later, the train would arrive in the town of Charlemont, and I knew the tunnel was only a short distance away. Finally, we would stop at Hoosick Tunnel Village, located about a half mile from the east portal. The conductor and trainman would come through the cars to close all the windows, ventilators, doors, and shades. They would light the kerosene or gas lanterns which hung from the ceiling, and with a whistle our adventure would begin. Suddenly, pitch blackness enveloped the car as we entered the tunnel. A minute or so later, the cold gas and smoke would begin to seep into the car around every door and window frame, and a smoky gray haze would settle upon all of us. The little engine had built up as great a head of steam as possible, but it still had to work up grade in Hoosick halfway. Finally, the ride of the car would change as we passed Central Shaft and the train started drifting down grade. The smoke and gas was getting worse and worse, and sometimes people would be coughing terribly. After about another 10 minutes or so, a gray dawn seemed to slowly break upon us as we finally exited West Portal. Shades and windows were promptly opened, and some semblance of clean air returned by arrival at the North Adams Depot. However, our faces, hands, and clothing all showed irrefutable evidence of a steam-powered trip through the Hoosick Tunnel. Okay, now we can put the lights back. And the tunnel sometimes was so bad that the engine crews would be gasping for breath, and breathing with putting wet towels over their faces to breathe, laying on the locomotive floor, the cab floor, and all of these steam engines had a broom for brushing off the cab floor occasionally, and they would stick it out the window, out the door, against the wall to see if they were moving. They couldn't tell. Well, there was more than one fatal accident because they literally went by a red signal 5 feet away. They couldn't see it. And if it wasn't moving, they stopped real quick, because if the engine was chuffing along and not moving, it was busily boring through the railhead. So if you bored down through the railhead, you stopped dead, you had to jack the engine up, and track crew had to replace the rails, and that didn't make anybody happy. So it was very, very difficult. And one of the few things that came from the years the B&M was controlled by the New Haven was the electrification of the tunnel in 1911. And here we have an interesting picture. Again, it's a passenger train. Note the 260 steamer. You've got a baggage RPO, you've got an express car, and you got 2 or 3 coaches behind it. In fact, it might be a second express car and 2 coaches. The B&M handled a lot of express from some print. One in particular was a printer up in Concord, New Hampshire, that used to do such magazines as Time and Life and Saturday Evening Post. And when those press runs came out, there was good express business to be had. This is an interesting picture because the B&M Historical Society has the actual glass plate negative in its archives. When the photo was taken, it did say Boston and Maine, but it said 2503 on the locomotive. And since Westinghouse wanted to use this in its advertising, because the electric engines were built, the car bodies were built by Baldwin, but the electricals were built by Westinghouse, they had retouchers change the name, emphasize the name, and change the numbers. You can see the black retouch ink on the actual glass negative. So that's interesting. And in fact, the white, the man leaning out of the cab was virtually invisible originally, and he was touched up, shall we say, as well. But it helped tremendously with the electric engines. They were quite popular. These are postcards from the period, and here are 2 shots that kind of give away what it was like working in the tunnel without any atmospheric considerations. Here we have 2,000 feet in from the east portal. We have the pinprick of light, shall we say, and to the right of that we have a 2-head track signal. Obviously this was taken in black and white. The track signals obviously would have been in color. And here we have what appears to be similar, just a single light, but it's really not. This is a westbound electric engine on the eastbound track. And the reason these photos were taken was because the track foreman made a mistake and that locomotive hit and killed him. These came from the legal department file of the railroad. And this is undoubtedly the first time they've ever been shown, other than to a lawyer or so in the railroad. This was 1944. Even then, that late date, Hoosick was a dangerous place to work. But a little bit later, this is October of 1945, and this is the Minuteman with, again, the head end, the RPO and the Express, and a couple of coaches, and the sleeper from Chicago, and the brand new, and I do mean brand new, diesel electric locomotive on the front. This was a PR shot. The locomotives had been on the property for a couple of weeks at most. The locomotive is 70 feet long. The car body is roughly 8 feet high from above the trucks, 10 feet wide. The entire thing gleams because it was hand Simonized. The first locomotives that were delivered from Electromotive were hand Simonized. And these were posed at North Station for a couple of days. This one was assigned to the Minuteman, and one was assigned to the Boston to Portland run. But even here, now, business is slowing down already. Now, this is the actual timetable that train was operating on, because it's the October 1945. And you can see train 59, the Minuteman, and you're out of Boston at 3:30. You're into Troy at 8:45. You're out of Troy in your sleeper at 9:02. You're into Albany at 9:22. And somewhere around 9:45 or 10, a westbound New York Central train picked your sleeper up for Chicago. But still, here you've only got 1, 2, 3, 4. You've got 3 trains that have interconnection to Albany. You've only got a total of 5 trains. So freight service was far more important to the west end of the B&M than passenger service ever was. Little comparison. This is a little bit later. This is 1950, but this is what was in service on the Boston and Albany. And let's turn it around so we can read it a little bit. The Knickerbocker was a Boston-Chicago train. The New England Wolverine, I believe a Chicago train as well, but also probably Detroit. The Southwestern Limited, that was a section off a single train, but that went to St. Louis with cars that were forwarded to Oklahoma and Texas. And of course, right up here, train 27, the New England States Limited, that didn't even stop in Albany. That ran through Schenectady. But here, and of course, you can also see these little statements, B-liner. Those were the Bud RDC cars. That's what the New York Central called them. And they were already being used in 1950, ping-ponging back and forth between Boston and Springfield and Albany and Pittsfield. But the New England States at that time was brand spanking new, various sleeping cars, full diner, full lounge, observation cars, the best that the Bud Company could build. And the States was considered second only to the 20th Century Limited or the advanced 20th Century Limited. In fact, its predecessor prior to 1938 was the Boston section of the 20th Century Limited. Now, here's the reality check. The New England States went from Boston to Chicago in 17 hours and 40 minutes on this schedule. The B&M sleeper took 22 and a half hours. Of course, 2 or 3 years after that, the DC-7 and the, well, basically did it in 4 hours. And here is a very unusual shot taken by the late Jim Shaughnessy at West Portal. Of course, Hurricane Carol did an awful job in New England, and it really whacked the Boston and Albany main line down through west of Springfield. For about 3 weeks, their premier train, the New England States, actually operated over the B&M. So the B&M helped the competition out a little bit with this at this time. And just to get in a little bit more, we're now 2 years later, or 3 years, this is September '52. The Minuteman is now the Streamline train, which is, some of you would know as the Flying Yankee, the little Bud-built Streamliner. That is all that was needed to handle the traffic through to Troy. It's the fastest time the railroad ever had for the Minuteman, 4 hours and 10 minutes. But you'll notice that there's no connection noted below the Minuteman, nor with this Hoosick train 63. It is now, if you want to go to Albany, you have to take a city bus. Passenger load is declining, and that's the response to it. Finally, this is a typical image of a train in the mid-50s west of Greenfield. You have an express car. You have a RPO baggage. You have what in this case appears to be an express car with open doors. So the car simply it's probably a New York Central car, and they're going to get it back on the New York Central property before midnight, hopefully. A commuter, or a suburban or commuter coach, probably for either the shorts, which would be people who got on in Greenfield and were getting off in Shelburne Falls or North Adams, and the only long-haul car is the final car in the train. So that and Bud cars were the last years of service. On January 17th, 1958, the last B&M passenger train left Troy Union. Starting the next day, the Bud cars came up and turned around at Williamstown and went back. This is a photo taken of the last regularly scheduled passenger train through Hoosick, taken at East Portal on November 30th, 1958. It was taken by Don Robinson, and it was either taken by a fellow crewman or he had a tripod set up, because that is definitely Don Robinson in the middle of the Bud car. I knew Don for years, and Don actually gave me this print, so that I do know Don. And that was the end of regular passenger service. I got a few shots here of some of the special trains that have gone through, and we can spin through those for a couple of minutes. This is a railroad enthusiast snow train from February of 1973, and I was young and foolish then, and I crawled up to the top of the catenary tower to take this picture down, and because everybody else was on the ground, I figured I'll just climb up there. I wouldn't do it today, but and I think some of you may remember this, October 6, 1973, the centennial of the tunnel. And here's an 8-car Bud train that came in from Boston, operated by the Mystic Valley Group, and it was very nice because, of course, a lot of people out to see it. The folks up from the city got to see the displays and spend the day in the city. And there were 2 shuttle trains for folks in North Adams in the area to ride through the tunnel and back. And here is the first shuttle train disappearing into the tunnel. How do I know it's the first shuttle train? Because I rode the second shuttle train. And that still remained a popularity. Mystic Valley was up here again in March of 1980. And it was supposed to be a snow train, but it was more like the rain train that day. Although it is a little interesting. At one time, this post had a no trespassing sign on it. It disappeared, that's all I know. Another one showed up later, but and in 1984, the RE ran another trip up here to celebrate the half-century of railfan trips to Hoosick Tunnel. They ran the world's first recorded fan trip in August of 1934. This was the so-called half-century limited. And they put this very nice plaque up on East Portal, and within a year and a half to 2 years, somebody stole it. So if anybody ever sees this thing, talk to me. Or anybody else around, because I'm sure it's been melted down. That's what happened, but it was just expletive deleted. And can I wrap things up? This is how they did it in 1934. Now, this particular RE excursion is actually 1937, but it's not materially different. The club reserved 2 cars. They're parked on the siding, and they clambered over to the Hoosick Tunnel in Wilmington, lovingly known as the Hoot, Toot, and Whistle, but perhaps more accurately known as the Hold Tight and Wary. These 2 flat cars had the low sides put on and bench seating put in, and everybody sat down. The photographer is either standing by the cupola of the caboose or he's sitting on it. And here, ahead of these guys, that's the locomotive stack. They're going to get the steam and the smoke just as soon as they start, but they don't care. They're all out for a good time, and by gosh, they had it. And safety regulations were a little looser. It seems like the safety regulations went in one direction, and the dress went in the other. No blue jeans, no sneakers, you know, it was a different time. And here is one other shot. This is from a different trip, but again, to ride the HT&W. And, you know, here they are en masse watching this freight prepare to enter the tunnel. The last train through the tunnel was operated 10 years ago. This month it was Amtrak's Autumn Express. And here we have it popping out of the East Portal of the Great Bore. And I hope I haven't been a great bore. And thank you very much.